"Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses." The words cut like a blade, and a moment later Officer Mark Davis's hand came down. Smack, Kira. Lawson's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning. Her briefcase burst open, files scattering like confetti. Davis shoved her against the cold stone wall, the handcuffs clicking twice, locking her wrists in steel. His breath reeked of coffee and cigarettes, mixed with a long, festering contempt. He repeated the insult, dragging out the word animals, as if power were measured in humiliation. A few steps away, the two accompanying officers, Eric Rhodes and Ben Thompson, made no move to intervene. They raised their phones, angling for shots, smirking as subpoenas and court papers skidded under their boots. The wind tugged at the stairwell, spinning pages into the air before letting them fall. It all played out before the heavy wooden doors, above which gleamed a polished brass plaque, the Honorable Judge K. Lawson presiding. Kira did not resist. Her eyes fixed on the plaque, a bitter taste rising in her throat, just 20 steps to the bench that was hers. 20 steps between honor and disgrace. She drew in a deep breath, forcing calm, gathering the searing pain into a single, still point in her mind. Inside, Judge Alan Pierce was alerted of a disruptive suspect. A man of procedure, he tended to trust officers over the cuffed. He signaled the stenographer to be ready, nodded to Ada Sarah Walsh at the prosecution's table, then tapped the gavel to open session. The doors swung, and Davis marched the defendant in a middle-aged black woman, cheek-bruised hair, neatly tied eyes sharp with cold light. Your Honor, Davis squared his shoulders, voice polished by years of reports during a routine security sweep. I encountered a suspicious individual attempting to enter a restricted area. She was improperly dressed, carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents. When asked to comply, she used profane language, made threats, and resisted. I was forced to apply minimum necessary force for safety. He produced a phone, playing a conveniently clipped video only the moment Kira's arm jerked into frame. My bodycam malfunctioned this morning, Davis added smoothly, but the court can see the loss of control. Behind him, Rhodes and Thompson nodded in sync, their faces blank. Kira sat at the defense table, cuffs folded neatly before her. She glanced at the screen, then murmured just loud enough nearby. How convenient. Judge Pierce looked up. What was that? Kira replied politely. Nothing. Your Honor. Yet her eyes stayed locked on Davis, marking every lie. The gallery stirred. Some clerks whispered, playing the race card again, while others nodded by reflex to the uniform. Habit pushed trust toward the witness stand. Only Jenna Morrison, a young clerk in the back, sat upright. Something in Kira's measured breathing and word choice made Jenna shiver. She had heard that voice every morning in the hallway. What's on the docket today, Jenna? The thought flickered, then died. Ada Walsh rose, scanning her notes. The prosecution moves for remand, charging trespass, obstruction of an officer, and fraudulent impersonation by carrying documents marked with judicial seal. Rhodes stepped forward. She claimed to be someone important to bypass procedure. Thompson added. She pulled away from restraint, tried to run. A seamless chorus. Davis finished with a sneer at Kira, dripping contempt. People like her always play the victim card. Not in my courthouse. The air thickened. The gavel cracked. Does the defendant have anything to say? Pierce's voice steady. Kira lifted her head. Not anger, not pleading. Only the clarity of someone who had heard this story too many times. She swallowed, tasting iron at her lip, then stood chains clinking. Your Honor, she said, clear and precise, I need to clarify a few points. Necks tilted forward, and in that moment the well-worn script split a hairline fracture spreading through the chamber. The courtroom sound seemed to collapse inward, leaving only the stenographer's keys clacking dry beats. Fluorescent lights washed the wooden bench in sterile cold. Even the wall clock ticked slower each beat, taut with foreboding warning that the familiar order was about to tip without warning. Your Honor. Kira Lawson raised her voice just enough to carry to the back row. I need to clarify several inaccuracies in Officer Davis's testimony. First, regarding trespass, I was walking on the public sidewalk leading to the main entrance at 8:47. Supreme Court precedent establishes that sidewalks adjacent to government buildings are traditional public forums. Citizens have the right to be present so long as they follow procedure. No signs, no restricted orders, no barricades. The charge is baseless. Second, the so-called suspicious documents are pending case files, judicial memoranda, and administrative communications. I have lawful access in the course of my duties. Calling them stolen is defamation. Third, as to profane language under the Fifth Amendment, I retain the right to remain silent. And if any words were uttered, it was after I was assaulted without cause directly in front of the courthouse. Judge Alan Pierce tilted his head. Kira turned toward the prosecution. I moved for preservation of evidence. This building has high-definition cameras spaced roughly every 15 feet along the entrance. Officer bodycams auto-upload to the county server every 60 seconds regardless of error reports. I request an immediate preservation order for 8:45 to 9:15 a.m. Security footage, bodycam backups, upload logs, and all phone recordings from responding officers. ADA Sarah Walsh shot up objection. The defendant has no legal standing to make such a motion. A pro se defendant has the constitutional right to present arguments and request exculpatory evidence. Kira replied, shifting slightly. The handcuffs clicked like a metronome. Under Brady v. Maryland, the prosecution has an obligation to preserve and disclose any evidence favorable to the accused. Device malfunction is not an exception. Davis stood, rigid sweat beating at his temple. Do you have legal training? Pierce asked. Dr. Lawson, she said with a thin smile. My credentials speak for themselves. She gestured toward the evidence table. Allow me to identify the suspicious documents. Walsh hesitated, then nodded. Kira opened her case, drawing out a court calendar stamped with the court's seal. Court calendar, Judge K. Lawson, 9:00 a.m. Peterson hearing. Next, she laid down a judicial parking pass, an access card coded to chamber doors, and a badge embossed with gold seal. Bailiff Carl Henderson sprang upright. For 3 years he had greeted her with, "Good morning, Your Honor." Now his face drained. He whispered, "Your Honor." Still, formal verification through administrative channels is required. The prosecution requests a recess for identity confirmation and maintains its motion for remand, Walsh said. Kira nodded. I agree to recess, but the preservation order must be signed immediately. Every second risks overwrite. Pierce nodded to the stenographer, record the preservation order as requested. Then he struck the gavel. Court will recess for 15 minutes. Walsh began calling frantically. Rhodes and Thompson muttered quickly, glancing at screens before stowing them away. Davis sat tapping a nervous rhythm with his fingers before falling still. Kira was escorted into a small anteroom. The door closed, muffling the noise. She leaned back against the wall, inhaling deeply, letting her breath steady. In her mind, the procedural steps lined up: preservation order, multi-point copies, device sealing, log retrieval. The door opened. Henderson entered carrying a garment bag trimmed with gold and a wooden box. He stammered, "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." Kira placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady. "You didn't do wrong. Do what's right. When we return, announce properly." Henderson nodded firmly. Kira opened the box. A wooden gavel lay in velvet, its handle engraved, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." She lifted it. Its weight straightened her spine. She draped the robe over her shoulders. Black folds cascaded the room itself, seeming to expand. Outside, procedure spun into motion. Each staff carried sealed hard drives. The chief judge's office sent urgent emails. The server logged checkpoints. The excuse of bodycam failure cracked under each line of data. Kira looked into the mirror. The bruise on her face was both evidence and reminder. She counted silently to 3, calibrating the timbre of her voice. The door opened again. Henderson stood tall, like a sentinel. "It's time, Your Honor," he said. Kira nodded. "All right." Beyond the door, the courtroom waited for 2 words to restore order, and when they came, everyone would rise no matter what they had believed. The signal was ready. Just a few more steps and Kira would reclaim authority, cast truth on the screen, and force every lie to bow before the law. All Rise Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Kira Lawson presiding. Bailiff Carl Henderson's call thundered against the ceiling. ADA Sarah Walsh swallowed hard. Eric Rhodes and Ben Thompson fumbled at their phones. Officer Mark Davis froze. Judge Alan Pierce, realizing he had been sitting in the wrong chair, shot up and backed toward the rear door. The judge's chamber opened. Kira Lawson emerged clad in a black robe trimmed with gold gavel in hand, its handle engraved, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." She walked slowly, seated herself in the chair that was hers, set the gavel neatly in place, and swept the room with her gaze. The bruise on her cheek now looked like a seal of authority. "Thank you, Judge Pierce, for handling matters in my absence," Kira said. "You may return to your docket. I'll take it from here." Pierce nodded and hurried out. "Officer Davis, remain where you are." Kira fixed her eyes on him. 2 hours ago you swore an oath and gave testimony in this courtroom. Let me remind you of a few words you spoke. She read them aloud. "These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators. Actions have consequences." She placed a tablet on the bench. Security Camera 7, main entrance. The screen lit up with footage from that morning. Kira in plain clothes, Davis blocking her path. The slap. Her wrists twisted, the cuffs clamped. His voice clear. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses." In the gallery, hands flew to mouths. "Do you see any profanity from me in this clip?" Kira asked. Davis said nothing. "Any resistance? Any threats?" Silence. She froze the frame at the moment. The cuffs locked the red welts vivid. "And here is the automatic backup from your own body cam synced to the county server every 60 seconds, she said, swiping to the next file. The closer angle, the clean audio. "Look at this uppity thinking she can just walk into my courthouse. They need to learn their place." Walsh stiffened, closing her notebook. Davis shut his eyes. "Officers Rhodes Thompson." Kira turned. "You confirmed this was professional procedure. Would you like to revise your testimony before the record is sealed?" Rhodes swallowed. Thompson glanced at the latch. Kira tapped another file, audio from Thompson's body cam. "Dude's really going off on this one. Think she's actually somebody important?" Rhodes' voice replied, "Nah, man. Probably just another welfare queen." Faint laughter followed. The courtroom hissed with disgust. Kira muted the audio, leaving the still frame of the judicial seal reflected on screen. "Identity verification is complete. That is this court's seal. Behind me is my name engraved on the bench. In the hall hangs my portrait of 10 years. I have presided here for 23 years. And this morning you assaulted that presiding judge on the courthouse steps." Walsh rose to raise procedure. Kira lifted a hand slightly. "The prosecution will speak in due course. For now, we review the evidence." She enlarged the timestamps: 8:47:13 contact, 8:47:19 slap, 8:47:24 cuffs, 8:47:31 slur. The stenographer captured each frame. Every timestamp hammered a nail into the false narrative. Officer Davis, Kira said you swore to tell the truth. The whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Is there any statement you wish to correct? Davis opened his mouth, then shut it. Kira closed the tablet. The preservation order has been issued. All relevant devices are sealed. Multi-point copies secured. Any interference will be deemed obstruction of justice. She tapped the gavel once. Next, the court will examine behavioral patterns through internal records, citizen complaints, arrest statistics, use of force ratios, and prosecution outcomes linked to you. A rustle spread across the courtroom. Those who had nodded on reflex now sat silent. They had just witnessed what needed no explanation, devices recording like a mirror exposing truth. And in that mirror stood not only Davis but the habit of blind trust in a uniform. Kira looked down at the front row. Officer Davis, you said actions have consequences. Correct. We will see what consequences your actions have sown for those without badges, without armor, without the privilege of being presumed right and for yourself. Henderson placed a thick binder on the bench. Disciplinary records, statistical charts, internal reports. Kira continued. The court will proceed to data review. I require cooperation from the prosecution, from the police department, and from the officers present. From this moment, all supplemental statements are under oath. Davis swallowed. Rhodes and Thompson exchanged a glance. Walsh lowered herself into her seat pen, frozen midair. Kira concluded, we begin. Henderson set the binder on the bench. Kira opened the first page, disciplinary records and citizen complaints concerning Officer Mark Davis, 15 years. She turned a sheet. 47 complaints. The repeated conclusion, insufficient evidence. 2 to 49. Arrests, 87% of them people of color. Kira continued. In a patrol zone, that's 42%, white, 31%, Hispanic, 27%, black. That disparity cannot be random. She flipped to the next chart. Use of force in 63% of cases involving people of color compared to 12% when the subject was white. Kira looked up. Numbers don't convict by themselves, but taken together they form a pattern. She moved to selected complaints, 2009, Rosa Delgado, age 63, called racial slurs. Face forced onto a hood after asking for badge number. Conclusion, insufficient evidence. 2012, Jamal Washington. 17 alleged drugs planted after he refused to inform on his brother. Conclusion, insufficient evidence. 2016, Dr. Michael Johnson handcuffed outside his own home for not fitting the neighborhood, held 6 hours. Conclusion, insufficient evidence. Kira turned to outcomes 432 cases, involving Davis dismissed, reduced, or thrown out for procedural or constitutional violations, nearly 40%. The final chart showed the sum $2, $3 million in settlements and judgments tied to Davis's conduct taxpayer funds. Officer Davis, Kira, asked, how do you explain your record diverging so drastically from your peers in the same precinct? Davis stayed silent. Very well. Kira set a copy of his sworn oath on the bench and read slowly, I swear to support and defend the Constitution, to discharge my duties faithfully and impartially. She paused. Neither word appeared this morning. She turned to the prosecution. The court orders immediate production of Davis's last 6 months of bodycam footage and upload logs. Additionally, under administrative authority, I have requested Chief Judge Margaret Carter to direct multi-point backups of all courthouse cameras from this morning and to compile every case involving Davis's testimony over the past 5 years. Walsh rose. The prosecution agrees to cooperate. Kira continued. For 6 months, this court has worked with the FBI Civil Rights Division, the Attorney General's Office, and the DOJ to review systemic bias. Your name is already on the watch list. This morning, you provided the most direct evidence yet. Davis blinked rapidly. Henderson handed over the use of force narratives. Kira read acting erratically, refused to comply, threatened officer safety. The same phrases stamped again and again. Language creates reality. When abused, reality is bent. Rhodes shifted. Kira motioned him still. She asked Walsh, "Is there any objective explanation for this pattern?" Walsh answered briefly. At this time, no. Back to motive. Kira replayed Davis's bodycam quote, "Look at this uppity. They need to learn their place." She closed the screen. When prejudice meets power, it becomes sanctioned violence. Kira swept the room. No one stands above the law. A uniform does not grant immunity. A robe does not either. The duty of this court is to put accountability where it belongs. She turned to Davis. "You have the right to counsel. If you do not have one, the court appoints." The side door opened. Michael Carter, public defender, entered. "Do you need 5 minutes with your client?" "Yes, Your Honor." During the recess, Henderson delivered sealed records of Rhodes's and Thompson's phones per court order. Walsh confirmed temporary custody. The stenographer added notes. The air felt compressed like after a storm. 5 minutes passed. Carter returned, Your Honor. My client exercises his right to remain silent. We request full access to discovery to prepare. Kira nodded. Granted. But what has already been shown provides sufficient basis for preliminary charges. She addressed the court. We will recess 10 minutes for drafting the next order. When we return, this court will announce Officer Davis's change of status to defendant detention conditions and evidentiary schedule. She raised the gavel. Let me repeat, deleting, altering, or unlawfully sharing data equals obstruction of justice. Violators will be dealt with immediately in this courtroom. The gavel struck wood. No one moved. The numbers and images aligned into a single map pointing at the same truth, a persistent pattern. And the words, "Not in my courthouse," were rewritten by history. This is not your courthouse. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was entirely different. No longer the confident whispers of habit, but the wary silence of people who had just seen truth projected onto the wall. Bailiff Carl Henderson stood rigid, a pillar. Adia Sarah Walsh sat still, pen pinched between her fingers. Officer Mark Davis slumped back, eyes avoiding anything with a reflective surface. Kira Lawson tapped the gavel lightly, the sound round and final, like closing one door to open another. Before proceeding, Kira said, voice steady and clear, "I need to establish the record of identity. I am Judge Kira Lawson, presiding here for 23 years. Appointed by Governor Richardson in 2001, unanimously confirmed by the state Senate. Graduate of Harvard Law School, magna cum laude, former editor of the Harvard Law Review. Before the bench, I served 8 years at the DOJ Civil Rights Division, prosecuting abuse of power and civil rights violations. Each milestone dropped like a marker reconstructing her career." She closed the file, fixing Davis with her eyes. "This morning, you assaulted a citizen on these courthouse steps accompanied by racial slurs. You then committed perjury under oath, fabricating a story to legitimize violence. When asked about your body cam, you claimed malfunction, while the auto backup system proved the opposite." Davis shuddered. A rustle swept the gallery, echoing his humiliation. Kira opened a new file. Preliminary Indictment 1. Felony assault. 2. Assault on a judicial officer in performance of duty. 3. Deprivation of rights under color of law. 4. Perjury in the first degree. She looked up. Prosecution's position on custodial status. Walsh rose cautiously. Your Honor, given the risk of obstruction and potential tampering with evidence, the state requests remand without bail. Defense. Kira turned toward the side door. Michael Carter. public defender emerged, tie hastily knotted. Your Honor, my client denies the allegations. We propose conditional bail, restricted witness contact, and full discovery access. Kira shook her head slightly. With the pattern shown bodycam security footage, fellow officers' recordings, plus preservation orders. In effect, the court finds a substantial risk of obstruction. Remand pending trial. Schedule evidence presentation within 10 days. Preliminary hearing to follow. Davis's breathing quickened. Carter placed a hand on his sleeve, whispering. Kira turned to Rhodes and Thompson. From this point, all statements are under oath. Personal devices sealed. Internal communications logged. Perjury and obstruction are prosecutable immediately, here and now. Rhodes stiffly nodded. Thompson lowered his head. Henderson handed over sealed evidence of both phones. Walsh confirmed custody. Order was crystallizing around facts. Kira lifted a printed oath, the pledge sworn with the badge. I solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution, to faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of my office. She read slowly each word, slicing through the air. Faithfully, impartially. This morning, those words were absent. She set the page down, staring at Davis. You placed prejudice above duty. Your Honor, Walsh interjected. In light of what we've reviewed, the prosecution requests expanded discovery, all cases involving Davis's testimony in the past 5 years, and immediate notice to Internal Affairs and the grand jury for review. Kira nodded. Granted. And, as recorded, Chief Judge Margaret Carter has ordered multi-point backups of courthouse footage. All extraction requests must be filed with Chambers today. She flipped back to a chart. Let me be brief about the system. The data shows complaint review processes used as shields stamping insufficient evidence, until digital proof forced the system to look directly. Police require power to ensure safety, but all power demands a ring of accountability. Without it, power becomes sanctioned violence. Davis lifted his eyes, lips trembling. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. Kira tilted her head. Your job is to protect rights, not tear them. Your job is to follow procedure, not bend truth to pad a report. She paused. If you wish to speak further, your counsel will advise what serves you best. Kira turned to the gallery. Some may wonder, why do I still sit here when I am also the victim? The answer, because the evidence is immediate. The obstruction risk urgent, and the public interest demands the court preserve and lock the situation at once. When this moves to trial assignment, we'll follow procedure to avoid conflict. Her words laid the foundation stone for the slope of procedure ahead. Now, Kira closed the file. The court must speak of the people behind the numbers. She read the names Rosa Delgado, Jamal Washington, Dr. Michael Johnson, and others, not just names, but stories layered on top, a face shoved onto a hood, 6 hours in a cell without apology, a school bag emptied out cold reports written like blades. With each, Davis seemed to shrink further. Kira set the gavel down, her voice softer, yet carrying far. No one stands above the law. A badge does not erase accountability. A robe does not either. Justice is not a moment's feeling. Justice is a process nourished by truth. She glanced at the clock. The court will recess 20 minutes. Upon return, the court will issue preliminary rulings on charges based on the evidence and detailed detention conditions. The gavel struck. Chairs scraped upward, almost in unison, this time not out of habit, but in obedience. 20 minutes later, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread, drawing in lawyers, clerks, even a few local reporters. Kira Lawson returned to the bench, her eyes no longer cold but clear, as if every piece had been set into place. Henderson called the room to order. Everyone rose. When they sat, Kira opened the decision file, her voice low and firm. based on direct evidence, security cameras, bodycam backups, recordings, the conflicting testimony of the defendant, and the behavioral pattern established by data, the court issues its preliminary ruling. Mark Davis guilty of felony assault. The gavel struck once. Guilty of assault on a judicial officer. Twice. Guilty of deprivation of rights under color of law. Thrice. Guilty of perjury in the first degree. The fourth strike fell heavy like a stone into water, its ripples spreading through the room. Michael Carter shot up. Your Honor, we object on grounds of conflict of interest. Kira raised her hand. Objection noted. The record will be transferred to the appropriate panel at the post-trial stage. However, in emergencies, the law allows the court to establish preliminary criminal liability when evidence is clear and present to prevent obstruction and preserve order. Carter's voice dimmed as he turned to Davis, trembling. Before sentencing, Kira said, I need to speak to you and to this room. Her gaze swept the gallery. For 15 years, Officer Davis, you've used reports to turn bias into written truth. Acting erratically refused to comply, threatened officer safety. Those phrases repeated again and again became the gate through which violence entered the lives of citizens without knocking. Her voice dropped, pulling everyone into silence. This morning, you thought you saw someone powerless. You slapped that person, cuffed that person, degraded that person. But you didn't strike an individual, you struck the office that defends the Constitution. And that strike, thanks to cameras and procedure, is now evidence. Davis blinked hard. In the back rows, heads bowed. Kira locked eyes with him. You said, actions have consequences. Correct. And the consequences today are not only for me. They are for Rosa Delgado, Jamal Washington, Dr. Johnson, and all the names reduced to numbers in your files. They should have had someone to say, enough. Today, justice speaks for them. Sentencing Kira said, her voice timed with the gavel. For felony assault and assault on a judicial officer aggravated by documented bias, the maximum under statute. For deprivation of rights under color of law given systemic impact and sustained pattern, the higher range of the federal guideline. For perjury, the most severe penalty as the falsehood occurred in open court. Combined, Mark Davis is sentenced to 25 years without parole, remanded immediately. The room held its breath, then exhaled as one. Davis wavered, clutching the edge of the table. I'm sorry, he stammered. I didn't know. Kira shook her head slightly. 15 years and 47 complaints were more than enough to know. She turned to Carter. Counsel, ensure your client receives medical attention if needed. From this point, all exchanges proceed through procedure. Supplemental order. Kira continued, eyes on Walsh. This court transmits all Davis records and camera logs to the FBI Civil Rights Division, the Attorney General's Office, and DOJ. Every case involving Davis's testimony over 5 years must be reviewed. Ongoing detentions relying on his statements must be reassessed immediately for bail. Officers Rhodes and Thompson, suspended on the spot files, referred to the grand jury for perjury and obstruction of justice. She turned to the packed gallery. To the victims who filed complaints only to be stamped insufficient evidence, the door reopens. To officers who serve with integrity, do not fear cameras. Fear what makes you want them off. To attorneys, prosecutors, judges, do not grow comfortable with convenience. Procedure only protects us when we protect procedure. Kira lifted the engraved gavel. Justice may be blind, but she sees all. The gavel fell once, twice, thrice, sealing the sentence like the lid of a coffin on a bad habit. Henderson stepped forward. New cuffs closed around Davis's wrists. This time, the click rang like the sound of order returning to its rightful place. Walsh exhaled, folding her file shut. The prosecution will fully cooperate. Jenna Morrison sat still, hands clenched, a faint smile breaking through. She knew the days ahead would be long and heavy, but at least she had just seen justice working not as a slogan on a wall, but as a machine of truth and accountability. "Court is adjourned," Kira said. But the story was not finished. It had only begun to walk out of the courtroom into the police department, the prosecutor's office, and the long-shelved files. Somewhere in the city, names would be called again, not to be judged, but to be corrected. And that, at last, is the purpose of law. 6 months had passed since the morning Kira Lawson's gavel fell 3 decisive times, and the city felt as if someone had flipped a switch. Community meetings filled to capacity, suggestion boxes overflowed, and sidewalk conversations around the courthouse revolved around a single theme: locking the door so lies could never return. On the other side, in a gray federal facility, Mark Davis woke to the slam of steel doors and slept under fluorescent light. Badge, pension, and privilege stripped away like an old coat, peeled off piece by piece. In his cell, Davis wrote letters he never sent. Over and over he scrawled the line, "Actions have consequences no longer as a threat to others, but as a confession to himself." Once it had been his shield. Now it was a mirror reflecting the moment he said, "They need to learn their place," and delivered that slap on the courthouse steps. Every footfall of a guard reminded him that when power is severed from responsibility, it collapses not in a crash, but drip by drip. In the city, the federal investigation led by DOJ and the FBI Civil Rights Division dug deep into data, citizen complaints, traffic stop records, use of force ratios, timestamps of bodycam shutoffs, patrol logs. The findings left no ambiguity. Years of bad habits had twisted into a rope. 12 officers were fired. 4 command staff indicted for concealment and misdirection. The police department placed under federal oversight by a consent decree with detailed reform schedules, clear performance metrics, and monthly public reports. The so-called internal mechanism no longer operated in the dark. Next came the review of 432 cases bearing Davis's imprint. The public defender's office formed a re-examination task force, working through the nights, triaging by key points prolonged detentions cases built solely on testimony files lacking physical evidence. Many cases were dismissed outright. Others reduced. Several convictions vacated, releasing people from cells into the tearful arms of families. The county authorized an $8.7 million compensation fund drawn directly from the police budget as an admission that public trust was the most expensive debt to repay. The tech division rolled out new bodycam standards, dual stream recording, local storage, plus cloud, chained with tamper-proof hashes, and real-time audit logs on independent servers. Any unjustified camera shutoff triggered automatic suspension and investigation. Kira Lawson collaborated with the police academy on a new ethics curriculum, simulations on unconscious bias de-escalation techniques, the craft of neutral language in reports, and the lesson of telling the truth while the camera is still running as a survival reflex. Procedure itself shifted. The sitting police chief resigned. The city recruited a reform commander from another state, pledging to open a public dashboard of stops force incidents and complaints in real time. The union initially protested, calling it handcuffing the cops, but under community pressure and the consent decree, they signed an addendum: early warning systems for high-risk patterns, mandatory counseling reassignment reviews, even rotation out of zones prone to bias. Individuals were swept into the legal current. Eric Rhodes and Ben Thompson were indicted by a grand jury for perjury and obstruction. Their attorneys cut partial plea deals in exchange for cooperation, surrendering devices explaining the script-adjusting process, and speaking to cadets about the cost of silence. Judge Alan Pierce issued a stark internal memo on the inertia of misplaced trust, mandating fixed question protocols for every bodycam malfunction case. Carl Henderson earned promotion to Judicial Security Chief and Chain of Custody oversight, inspecting each screw of procedure as if checking a lung. At the prosecutor's office, ADA Sarah Walsh unveiled a new Brady Protocol open file discovery by default mandatory checklists, automatic alerts for any equipment malfunction claims, and strict discipline for noncompliance. Any case relying primarily on officer testimony now required dual-level review before indictment. Walsh held a public apology session. Tears could not erase the past, but they became the first adhesive in rebuilding trust. The trial video passed 50 million views. Law schools invited Kira to lecture on power procedure and the morning slap. Jenna Morrison applied and was hired by the ACLU, specializing in camera data litigation. The community formed a civilian oversight board and opened a new hotline. One teenager, once stopped without cause, approached Kira after a talk, "I want to study law. If I fall, will justice see me?" Kira touched the faint scar of her faded bruise and smiled. "If we force it to see justice, we'll see." And so the city relearned the movement that seemed simplest yet was hardest to stand up. Not rising out of momentary anger, but out of a new reflex to prioritize truth, now running through the pipes of the institution. A bright morning bathed the stone steps where it had all begun. A white tarp was pulled away, revealing a new bronze plaque, Justice Lawson, Federal Courthouse. Beneath it, a simple line. Here, truth found its voice again. The high school band played a modest march. Henderson stood in the honor guard, shoes polished like mirrors. Walsh blended quietly into the crowd, gripping her worn notebook. Applause rolled under the stone eaves, not for ceremony's sake, but because for half a year the city had lived through a painful awakening. Kira Lawson stepped to the podium. She spoke without flourish. Her words were nails driven straight into wood. "No one stands above the law," she began. "Not a uniform, not a title, not even this bench. Law has meaning only when we keep our oath. When that oath is broken, process is the path back. That morning, cameras were the eyes. Today, you are the legs that carry justice forward." Applause rose, then fell back into silence, waiting. She turned to the row of new officers, her gaze steady, not harsh. "Every day you will choose between authority and power. Authority comes from respect. Power comes from statute. Rely only on power, and you'll be distrusted quickly. Treat the camera as your best witness. A badge is not a shield. It is a promise to protect both those who like you and those who don't." Then she looked toward the prosecutors and attorneys' rows. "The easiest story to believe is the one that flatters power." She said, her tone low but warm. "Question every bodycam malfunction as you would your own bias. Brady is not a rubber stamp at the bottom of a file. It is the heartbeat of a fair trial. Do not let inertia turn us into unfeeling gears." At the end of the row, Pierce bowed his head slightly. Walsh drew in a deep breath, as if to etch it into memory. The rows for citizens opened, and Kira addressed them eye to eye. To those who filed complaints and were handed only the words, "insufficient evidence, we hear you." She read aloud names that had become symbols: Rosa Delgado, Jamal Washington, Dr. Michael Johnson, promising they would no longer be reduced to file numbers. In the lobby intake, desks now processed reopened cases. Some left with expungement, some with apologies, some with checks, all walked out standing taller. Hundreds of miles away, Mark Davis sat on a bunk, a small TV reflecting his weary face. The noon broadcast replayed his words. Actions have consequences from the courtroom, then cut to the image of Kira's gavel falling. He shut the TV off. In the thick silence, he found odd comfort in knowing that even in prison, his rights to counsel and medical care were honored. The line between law and raw instinct, the very boundary he had trampled, now enclosed him. Jenna Morrison walked through the glass doors of the ACLU on her first day. Stacks of reopened case files awaited. She learned to read camera logs aligned timestamps and unravel the report language of acting erratically, refused to comply with unblinking frames of video. That afternoon, she stood beside a mother welcoming her son home after months of detention. "Thank you for believing," the woman said. Jenna smiled, remembering the courtroom moment when everyone had risen. From then on, she believed the act of standing up could spread. Henderson returned to his shift, inspecting every evidence seal like it was a life's doorway. Pierce sat in an empty courtroom rereading his own memo on judicial skepticism. Walsh moved from desk to desk, checking Brady checklists like breathing. At the academy, cadets ran simulations learning to step back instead of lunge. At the precinct, the public dashboard flickered with live data showing the community numbers once hidden behind walls. As the ceremony drew to a close, Kira touched the new bronze plaque. The metal was cool under her fingertips. She remembered the faded bruise, the engraved gavel reading, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." Justice wears a blindfold to stay impartial, but through procedure and people she sees everything. Some days she wears a robe and holds a gavel. Some days she is simply a phone raised at the right moment. "Never underestimate the power of standing up," Kira whispered, as if to someone who would come here on another day. Then she turned, stepping down the very stairs once marked by a slap, now marked by a promise kept. When the courthouse doors closed and the plaque "Justice Lawson, Federal Courthouse" gleamed in the sun, the story reminded everyone that justice does not arrive on its own. It needs courageous people, transparent procedures, and cameras that do not lie. The bruise on Kira's face faded, but the lesson of responsibility and power cut deeper each day. According to you, what was the true tipping point that set the gears of justice in motion in this story? If you found this video meaningful, please like and share to spread the message, stand up for truth, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.